I wanted to talk about, in particular, Squad, but I'm going to talk about AI a little more in general. Because what I generally find, is, when I get a group of folks, you get a mix of what people have done with AI and whatnot. I mean, just from the pre-conversation, I could tell a lot of stuff in the beginning of my stuff, Kelly will definitely have had experience with, but others maybe not. So, um, and let's see here. There we go. All right. So sure enough, I am Chad Green. So I'm a senior system architect at Jasper Engines. You most likely have not heard of us, although we do have actually an office or a location in Salt Lake City. But we're in behind the scenes, and obviously we make engines and transmissions and all kinds of other things, powertrain. And then, I've been doing this stuff for a really, really long time. I actually started writing code in 1977. Not professionally. I'm not that old. But I am old enough that I started writing code in 77. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because, two things when we talk about AI, right? I mean, one, definitely excitement of this. I mean, it's, I've seen a lot of things, right? I've seen all the case tools and the extreme coding tools and all of these things that were supposed to make our lives easier, and all they really did was add more processes and such. And but AI really, I think, does make a difference. Of course, for the last 3.5 years, we've been hearing in the next 6 months our jobs are gone. I obviously don't believe that. I think AI really helps us be better at our jobs. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about with all this. So, all right, the hardest thing to do on a virtual call. This is the first time I've done this virtually, but so we'll just do raise a hand or whatever. So, how many folks are using Copilot today? Or I guess more importantly, how many folks are not using Copilot today? That's probably the easier way to put it. Okay, so at least someone hasn't been
Copilot
using Copilot.
specifically, or Copilot and Codex and Claude and all of them?
Well, because I'm going to talk about some things about, and I should say GitHub Copilot. The fun part about Microsoft is, there's Copilot this, Copilot that, and everything's just Copilot. And I will say, I am talking specifically about GitHub Copilot today. How many folks have not seen the CLI? Probably around the same number of folks. All right, because I'm going to show that, and I will say this: I'm going to show the CLI because I really like working with the CLI, but I don't think it's necessarily the best way to work with the CLI. I'm sorry, with GitHub Copilot. It's the best way for me. And one of the, I think one of the things that GitHub definitely has been doing is producing maybe too many ways to do it. Because there's the new agent window in Visual Studio Code. There's the new GitHub Copilot, console or not console app, but Windows app. They have a lot of different ways, and I think what makes sense is to use what you've used. And then I'm going to assume most have not dealt with an AI team, dealing with multiple folks. And then, of course, that's kind of the whole point of what we're going to talk about Squad, because that's what Squad's doing. But like I said, I want to get to some of the basics first. So, because we'll start with Copilot, we'll level set, and then going through some of the different tool sets and so forth. All right. So Copilot, right? And going all the way back to the basics, right? What came out about a year and a half, 2 years ago? GitHub Copilot. Basically, like the subtitle says, your pair programmer. This was the whole idea of how can we have things, basically intelligence on steroids. When you really think about it. And one of the things that GitHub was able to do is they were able to take, and we could debate whether or not this was right or wrong, but they took all the code in the public repos of GitHub, and they trained on it, right? And they learned how to work with that, and what people were doing, and that's how they got it all started. They actually have since been training more and more on Microsoft code because one, they can get it more fresher and and get things. Of course, we could also say there maybe some little bit of issues with that also because um, Microsoft does things that most of us don't do. But the point is they're training all this stuff, and then the initial stuff we saw within GitHub Copilot was these code completions, right? And again, just to affirm what I'm talking about here, um, if we were to look at like let me make that bigger. If we were to look at like just a regular um, class file. I'm just in a to do class. I start typing in public class. There we go. Um, because it sees that name of my class is to do item. So it's already done some things. And again, a simple tab, and I've got I've got a class here. I mean that represents a to do class, right? It's also good with things like a person, right? And getting me things like that. So, you know, and that just right there saves you time, right? I end up do a lot of Terraform work, just because someone the company's got to do the Terraform work. And like there, it's amazing. I can just start typing things and it'll code complete, right? So it's not just one language; it's multiple languages. You know, I mean, obviously, we can also do things like come to our chat window. Once I find my mouse pointer, there we go. And I could say things like, add a method uh, to, you well, let's say, add a date complete field, and then a method to mark that complete. I right now, honestly, I mean that's a really easy set of code that I'm asking to do, and this is where you kind of honestly, I think you can type that faster than what AI can generate this bit of code. But you have this, and especially nice when you are looking, when you're working on a code base you don't know as well, right? And having it, work through some things real quickly. If you don't know, there you go. So now we see that method coming up. We get an explanation of what we did. So really nice, right? And really useful. And I think useful for all levels of folks, right? I mean, this is useful, again, not so much a to-do method, but as someone who's been doing .NET since I mean, I was working with the betas of .NET, the original .NET betas. Um, to I've got interns who don't do a whole lot of .NET in college. They're that's one of the things they're learning right now, and I think both sides get a lot of these benefits to include everyone else in between. So lots of things that we get because we have these kind of things. So but GitHub said, well, what can we do more, right? And so, or I should finish my slides here, right? Because there's some great things here, but what we saw originally, this was only Nether, all right. It was working with it lives in Visual Studio Code, but the nice part it was also lives in Visual Studio, JetBrains, but nowhere else, right? It was only in the editor. It only had a single context window, right? Especially the initial versions, right? It only worked on the file you were working on at that point. They added features to add, to be able to add more files or to look at the whole repo. Um, and it's definitely, it's one suggestion at a time, right? So, which is great, but it's not coordinated. It's not using more expertise and so forth. One of the things that they looked at was what if, Visual Studio Code is great. Visual Studio, JetBrains, these are great tools. But what if I don't want to be, in the editors, right? What if I just want to be in the terminal? And especially like I said, I do a lot of brainstorming, right? I work in architecture, so a normal day of me with Copilot is, hey, look at this feature. Let's discuss this feature that we've got to architect. Make sure we don't have any ambiguities in this, look for those kind of things. And then, oh, okay, now let's talk about these different kind of things. So not necessarily where I need to be in a code editor, right? So, so things that we do, in a terminal. So this came out last September. It was pretty quiet when it first came out because like I didn't even hear about it until February. Of course, also with AI, everything moves so fast that even saying in February, that seems like it was 5 years ago in the AI world. Um, but so they came up with the CLI. This idea of now I can have something in the terminal, right? I see these things. So, I can do things like I can ask it to suggest things. I can ask it to explain things. If we were to look at this, again, I'll switch over again this time to the terminal. So here I am. Sure enough, I'm using Microsoft Terminal. You could be using, just the command prompt or what have you. I do like the regular terminal. I am using PowerShell. Not that you need to be using PowerShell. It's just, again, I do a mix of things to include, I end up doing a bunch of PowerShell stuff. So being in here makes sense. Um, and then I want to be one of the cool kids. So I've got, all my posh running. So, the screen looks a little bit nicer. But other than that, I'm just in a regular Copilot here. And, I can go and stuff, I can go in here and I can say things like, or go to Copilot. And so I'm going to use the YOLO command, which is, you only live once. I don't actually, especially if you're starting to use, the CLI or Copilot in general, I don't really recommend doing YOLO until you know what it's doing. Basically, the whole point of it is I won't get prompted every second for like every read it wants to do, every write it wants to do. Um, and admittedly, it depends on what I'm doing, whether I turn on or off YOLO. I'm almost always, I personally do turn it on. But like yesterday, it was a perfect example. I was actually I'm not very good at networking, and I was having to figure out networking, having Terraform build this networking stuff, and I was doing it all through Copilot. And there's where I wanted it to tell me everything it was doing. I didn't want to make any guesses, right? So that's a perfect example of that. But for a demo, the YOLO not having YOLO definitely gets annoying because it will prompt you on a lot of different things. But we're in here, and let me also bring up my um, so we're in here now. We can see we can do some things. So first off, so one of the benefits of Copilot, just in general, is that it's not one model, right? So you know so for example, cursor, right? I mean, you're using the cursor models. If you're in Claude code, you're using the Claude models, and grant you, all those models are really really good. If you're using the codex tools, you're tied down to the GPT. Copilot is really nice in the sense that I have all these other models I can be using to include all those or most of those. So I can type model, and like you can see, the models that I have available to myself. All right, so we can see the Claudes, the GPTs, the Geminis, and I will say I'm on this is a Copilot Personal, the Max, I think is what it's called, account. It does depend on which account you have. So like, for example, on my business account, there are several things here I don't have, right, that I have here. Um, and you can even see some things that are blocked, right? Um, and again, depending on what type of account you're on, you'll see more of that. If I was in my work, you'll see more blocks because our company is tying things down. So just want to point out there are a lot of different models, and something really important to talk about to include. I mean, they get things real quick. Fable's in here, right? So Fable's just got released this week. This is the new hotness. So if you've been hearing about Claude, and I just drew a blank of not Mystique. Is there Mystique? What
Mythos.
the one that Claude is given, or Anthropic is given to like all the big software companies and such.
Claude Mythos.
Mythos, thank you. I knew it was something with an MY. I just could not think of the, yes, Mythos. So Fable is actually based off of Mythos. It's just added more guardrails to it, right? Because the whole thing about it, apparently, it is so good that they can find vulnerabilities, really, really fast. And so they wanted to protect things. But point being is, we already have this, in Copilot, right? So there's not even really a delay in here. Now, one of the things to really show, and I don't think it's fair to show on an expensive one, but like if I look here at Claude Sonnet, and this is really important to understand because June 1st, all the pricing changed. So if you've been using Claude, or not Claude, if you've been using Copilot for a while, up until June, the pricing was very, very favorable. It's not that it's bad now, but prior to June, it was the number of requests you did. And a request, one request, wasn't related to another request. And what I mean by that, so in the previous models, like a Sonnet 4.6 cost me one request. Every time I did a request, regardless of how many tokens you used, it was one request. And regardless of how long it ran and so forth. But you also had things like Haiku was only a third of a request. Prior to some of the changes, Opus was 3 requests. They did make it more expensive. But now we're actually charged by the credits. So you can see in here. So basically, essentially what you do is you take how much you're paying per month for your subscription, you multiply it by 100, and that's how many credits you get. That are I don't want to say prepaid because you're paid. Well, it is prepaid. You're basically prepaying for that. So you take that, and then you can see in here. So to use Sonnet, for all the input tokens that I put, every million input tokens cost 300 credits. Every million output tokens cost 1,500 credits. Right. So definitely some things to think about. This does, just be honest with you, this does make Copilot more expensive than it was a month ago, or even 2 weeks ago. But I think this is what we're going to see, right? Claude and Sonnet, or not Sonnet, but Claude and Cursor haven't made that change yet, but there's a lot of belief that they will be. Especially, we're talking about companies that are going, IPO, and they're losing tons of money. They can't do that when they go IPO, right? They've got to start making money at some point. But so just to the point, things to look at. And I will say, using Auto is a really good option. So Auto, what happens is the GitHub Copilot coordinator looks at your request and looks at what the complexity of that request is, and will try to do a good job, and it generally does a good job of picking the right model to use, right? And it's looking to pick the model that can get the job done and use the least amount of credits. It is good at that. So I know at our company, I've been preaching, to them to use Auto as much as possible. There are times when you need to kind of push it. There are times when you're doing Auto and you're just not getting the responses you need. So then you say, okay, well, I'm going to, hey, I know I really need to use Opus or something. This is really computational or what have you. But right, so we've got the models, right? I want to make sure we understand those. And again, one of the benefits that we see in here. And again, I'm basically in a glorified chat window at this point, right? It's just I now have the whole terminal screen to do this. So I could do things like create a new .NET Web API project, and and it should be able to do this. Now, again, the other fun part about doing demos on AI is every time I do these prompts, I will get something different, right? Because that's AI is not deterministic. So let's see what we get here. So we can see, like I have no idea why I picked up demo notes for Lua.net. but it has decided to do that because it's actually, I'm in a folder for St. Louis, or not St. Louis, but Salt Lake City. But there we go. It's created a project, right? And sure enough, if I was to, if I was to pull this up, um, we can see that it, again, why I decided to pick Lua.net, I'm not sure, but it did just, probably because I've done this demo a bunch of times, and Lua.net being my abbreviation for Louisville.net. But we can see it created a project, right? And I should be able to run that at that point. So, some interesting things we could do, right? But also, I don't have to do things like that. I can also do things like, ask questions. I talked about, that's what I do most of my day is just asking questions. Well, not most of my day. That sounds like that's all I do. But I do a lot of that. But, so example, I mean, how about you all? But I'm not very good at Get. That's, I cheat and I let Visual Studio do a lot of that for me. But, what if I heard about this rebase, what can I do with that, right? So I can ask questions, and there we go, right? I can get an answer to that, right? And again, I mean, that was just one example. I purposely picked something easy so it comes up quickly, but lots of things we can see in there. The one other thing I want to show before I come out of the, this part of the demos is if you look over in the corner here where my mouse is at, this 2.8 IAC. So in this session, I've used 2.8 AI credits. All right, so you can kind of start to gain an example of what those cost. One of the things I would love for them to do is to add like how much I've used this month, because that's the more important number. But that was a nice addition that came out right on June 1st. They made that update. So, and I will say the other thing, Visual Studio gets updated all the time. Copilot CLI, laughs at that, right? Because basically I've seen it where there's been multiple updates in one day. Now, that was probably because they were doing a bug fix, but they are really fast at working these things. So, one last thing to show as I'm, in the CLI, before we get into bigger things with this, if we were to exit, and again, I mean, the exit commands and all that special, but I did want to show, I mean, we do also get a summary at the end, which again, as you're trying to learn what does a credit mean and what did I do, so we can kind of see this, right? I mean, so I used 2.8, but I can see I had 122.1 thousand, input tokens, all right, and I got back 1.4K, 1,400 output tokens, all right, which is part of the reason why it was only 2.8, right? So output tokens are always going to be more expensive than the input tokens because the output is, output, that's the computation that happened to generate that. And then one other thing to show in here, you notice that I get this thing, Copilot resume, and then this long thing. Basically, if I was to just copy that, and I'll just skip the yellow for a moment, but I go right back into my prompt, right? And I'm back loaded to my session, so I can see what I was doing. So that's really nice. And you can do things like I can rename this, and I could say, demo 2, right? And there we go. That's now named that. If you look in the upper corner, you'll see this, the tab has changed to demo 2. And now if I exit this, you'll even, my resume now is demo 2. So I can have an easier name to remember to start those back up. So, just real quickly, that's, looking at what we see with the CLI. And I will say, I mean, even since I wrote these slides, and these slides aren't that old, they've introduced other clients, right? There's the new GitHub client. I guess I could really quickly, the the part that everyone loves showing with this. So I mean, this is the client. I really haven't done a whole lot with this, so I can't really demo it so much yet. Whoops, it just closed on me because it's doing an update. Yeah, like I say, they make a lot of updates all the time. So it's decided to do another install for some reason. But anyway, the one thing you could do is you can actually, oh, here we go. Here it comes back up. The one thing everyone loves to show on the demo is, I can actually take the Octocat and, oh, for heaven's sakes. I've never seen it do it that much. Yeah, okay. It's trying to update it again. But so there's that. So that's all great, right? I mean, now, like I said, we've got more tools, and again, like I say, it was funny because I was just mentoring someone the other day. I mean, basically one of the architects on my team, and he was like, hey, I'm not really comfortable with the CLI. I like Visual Studio Code better. And I'm like, so keep on using that, right? So, definitely a thing to point out. But, we talk about CLI, I mean, this is definitely advanced, but it's still, I'm asking for a command, it suggests, I run it, right? There's, it's not very agentic yet, right? I mean, we can definitely do a whole lot more things in here. And, that's kind of my next point. Where we start really seeing power is adding things like agents and some other things in here. Once I add an agent, basically, if we think about this with a chat mode, I ask, I get advice, I make a decision, and then, I keep on repeating this, right? Like an agent, this is more like, hey, I need you to do something, right? So I describe something I need to get done, and it starts executing this, right? Because basically, I'm defining an expert, right? We can judge, sometimes I wonder how much of an expert they are, but we can get to this, right? We can, and like I've got in there, I mean, this is like going from asking a friend for advice to hiring a contractor to get something done. And, this is where, this whole agentic type thing, right? The idea that I'm having agents do things, and when we look at agents, they've got the powers to read files, to run commands, to write code and edit, to iterate on errors. And that iterating, the iterations, that's where we start seeing the real power, right? We're hey, I've got this, this piece of code, and I'm getting this kind of error in production, help me fix this, right? And then you can go let it go to town on that and get it fixed. Now, I'm gonna give my big caveat, and I think I say this, at company meetings at least, I feel like at least once a day, and that is, you still own the responsibility of what that agent is generating, right? I mean, I've told people that I never want to hear, on a PR, well, the agent did that. I actually had to correct someone today, right? Now, admittedly, I had to correct someone because it was actually one of my platform engineer folks, and they decided to upgrade this app from .NET 8 to .NET 10, and I'm like, why did you do that? And he was like, well, because all the other things I've been working on are .NET 10, so I thought this should be .NET 10 also. I'm like, but you're platform engineering, you're not the developer team, right? And then I'm like, and how did you go about that? Oh, I don't know. I just had the agent do it for me. And I'm like, yeah, part of the reason why I don't want you doing it because you don't understand what you're doing, right? So same thing, right? I mean, we need to have ownership of this. So, again, if we see this in a little more detail, we can see this with chat, I run it, whereas the agent runs it, it's basically read only. It's not 100%. Actually, I just realized, I don't know why I've got that because that's not 100% true. You can write files, but with the agent, it's taking more responsibility with that, right? So it's definitely getting a whole lot more assistance with this. And if we were to look at a loop, right? I mean, basically, and I kind of already talked about this, but when we look at an agent, we start off with a plan. And again, you actually don't have to do a plan, but you should, right? And it will, I mean, even if you don't tell it to do a plan, even if you just give it a step, I mean, it's first thing it's doing is it's looking at what you told it to do, and it's going to make a plan for what it needs to do for that step. Now, what you really should do is say, hey, here's the things we're going to do, build a plan, let me review that. But like I say, it's gonna build that plan, it's gonna read through what you need to do, it's gonna read its context, and then come up with a plan. And then it's gonna act on that, right? So it's all okay. Chad asked me to do these things. So my plan says I'm gonna go to the foo file, and I'm gonna make these changes, and I'm gonna go to the bar file and make those changes, right? And it's gonna do those. And then generally it will do some tests, it will do some checks. Now, this isn't necessarily meaning that it's going to write, unit test or what have you. You can tell it to, but it will at least try to do some validations of it. I will say that's not 100% of the time. It is what it's supposed to do, more often than not, but it doesn't always do that. Sometimes you have to instruct it to do that. But hopefully, that's what it's doing. And then, it'll iterate through those, right? And you'll see this. I mean, if you ever look at the log that the AI is generating, he'll say, "Oh, I made this change, but that wasn't right. So I went back and and I made another change, and so forth." And then this whole thing is a process, right? Because it might fix those errors, it might come up with a new plan, and then do all those things. And again, if you think about it, this is pretty much the way how we work also, all right? While we might not formally write down a plan, we do sit there and we say, okay, well, here's what I need to do. And then I go do it, and I look for problems and so forth. And when we look at this, without an agent, right? I mean, I got to write the code, I get an error, I got to fix it manually, error again, fix it again, done eventually, right? At least that's my experience. With an agent, I get that automated, right? I describe the task. The agent runs in a loop. I give it 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe 5 minutes, depending on how complex the task I told it to do, and that's done. Now, the really cool part though is depending on that loop that I'm doing, and again, because we'll run this automatic loop, those loops also could be, half hour, 2 hours long, right? Depending on what you're doing. And, going back to, talked about GitHub changed the pricing to use AI credits. That's part of the reason why. It was really advantageous. I mean, I had things, before where they would run for like 2 hours, spinning up multiple agents to run, and I would pay like 1 or 2 credits, right? Or 1 or 2 requests. Now I'm going to have to pay for those requests. Now I will say, again, just going back to the pricing thing, there is a lot of controversy about this. I'm not so negative on it. I mean, it's definitely, I know for a fact it's going to cost our company a little bit more money, but it's a little bit more money, but well-deserved money, right? I mean, we're still getting more out of it than what we're paying for it, right? So it's okay. So great, you're using agents, and but the thing about an agent, it's only got its context. It's only got what is in the agent file, and an agent file, I should also state, it's just a markdown file, right? I mean, it's just text, all right? Which makes it very easy to write, to update. As a matter of fact, I don't really show it here, but I mean, you can literally in the Copilot window, do a /agent or create agent, I think it is, and describe what you want. And Copilot will actually generate an agent for you. And then you can edit that thing and give them more information. But, there's only so much you can put in the instructions. I mean, not really, you're not actually limited, other than, how many tokens you're allowed to input. But there's only so much you can do it, right? And the thing is, it's got limited context window, right? There's only so much I can give it. There's no cross-team perspective, right? I am defining, hey, you are, a tech lead. You are a back-end developer. You are this or you are that. Actually, and admittedly, I've been writing less of URs, especially look at Squad, because Squad writes those differently anyways. But we're not getting those type of perspectives, and I have to provide it clear instructions. So there's definitely some things, and especially those better instructions, because there are some things built in that really do help with that. And that's kind of where I get to my next session here. Basically, giving agents instructions and skills. So these are two other types of files. Honestly, these are so related, it's not even funny. There's not that much difference between what a skill is and what an instruction is, but there is some differences, right? So if we look at this, talk about instruction. It's basically a job description, all right? And it gives it things it needs to do. So that could be coding standards, right? I could tell it, hey, we use Pascal case for C#, right? It could be architecture. Hey, when we're doing this, we're going to use a repository pattern, and you probably will put just more than repository pattern, right? But you'll have that kind of information. It might have stuff like your tech stack. But also instructions can provide more information. I mean, here is an example, simple instructions. This is actually a very simple instruction where I'm just providing coding standards and architecture. But I can actually get a lot further with this. So I was talking, when I first joined the call, we talked about, like what I've been working on. In particular, I've been working on an architecture process using AI. And, we do produce, honestly, a little bit too many documents, but the dev teams like that. So, and that's the more important part. I mean, if the dev teams have come to like those, and but at any rate, one of the things we've done is we've set up instructions, and so we've got instructions that says, hey, you're creating a process flow document, and so we give okay, well, here's the things you need. It needs these elements. It needs to be written this way. Here's our expectations, right? Use Mermaid for diagrams and so forth. And sure enough, once you're using an instruction file, the agent reads this first, right? The very first, after it reads its own context, it then reads this instruction file. So a really important part to say. And I should say one other thing to put in here, you don't see in here, but the other cool part I can do with instruction files is I can actually put in, hey, this applies to, and then have like a glob expression. So going back to my process flow example, we literally have in there, this applies to when you're working on files in the markdown files in the process flows folder, right? I mean, so it automatically knows to use that instruction. There's also skills, and your certifications. I mean, this is basically giving it more details, right? And really really setting the stage of what it can do and how it can do that. So in your skills, you might have things like API access, right? How do I call these external APIs? How do I parse those response? How to use tools, right? Hey, when you're doing this, use, go off and use this CLI tool or run this script or what have you. And then, the other part is the domain knowledge, right? So, hey, when you're doing this, optimize your SQL this way, or here's what you do with Docker, right? I'm definitely not going to talk about Docker because Rob's on the call, and Rob knows more than I will ever know about Docker. But you can do things like that in here, and so basically, job descriptions are like your job description, your skills are certifications. And to give you an example of like what I mean with a skill, I was tweaking this just yesterday. We have a skill. So we use Azure DevOps, and we have a skill that instructs Copilot how to read the work items and how to write the work items and how to trigger the pipelines and so forth. And that's a skill that we've written, right? So we're giving it information, and then it sees that, and it says, okay, because it actually in the Copilot instructions and the generic instructions, I've told it, hey, when you're working with Azure DevOps, because I'm getting the team to do that more. While we're working with Azure DevOps, I'm getting the team to work with the agents more. It knows to use that skill. So, but the real benefits here are kind of when you add this together, right? I add some instructions, I add some skills. I get more of that specialized agent. So now the agent is able to do even more, right? And it works better on a team. So there's a lot of benefits of doing this. So, 40 minutes in, and now I'm going to get to the whole point of this talk, right? And that's squad. But it's really important to understand all those steps because this all goes into building a good squad. So, Squad is an open source tool. It was originated from Brady Gaster. He has several other people that have been helping him out a lot with that. And the idea of how can I coordinate multiple agents to get work done, all right, and work in a coordinated manner, and not just a matter of parallelism, right? That's an important part of that, but so I can have specialized agents, right? So maybe I have a front-end developer and a back-end developer agent, right? Yeah, so the front-end developer has details about what to do for the front end, right? The back-end developer has details of what to do with the back end and so forth. Because, just going back to this, the problem with one agent, again, limited context windows, right? So I think I actually believe they actually did increase this, but I need to look this back up. But I know for a fact that the Copilot Windows was tied to 200,000 input tokens. I do believe they've increased that just recently. But still, there's a limited context window. What happens when I need to work with more contacts, right? But also a single agent is single perspective, right? If it's that front end developer, well, then it's looking at at everything as a front end developer, not as a back end developer, right? And then everything it's going to do is sequential, right? Because it's one agent, right? That's the way how it's going to work. So lots of things we could definitely improve with, and that's where we start seeing Squad. Its idea is, hey, give me this orchestrated team. So in here we can see, I've got a lead, a back end, a front end, and a tester. All right. And we can see the domains, right? So that lead is responsible for the architecture and the routing, right? So routing task is what we're really meaning there. The back end, the API and the database, the front end, the UI of the components, right? And then, the squad engine is the one, that's actually coordinating all this and making sure this all happens. And the nice part is that, each one of these agents, they get a charter. It's a little bit more than just a rare agent file, although it really is just an agent file. You can actually take just, if you have an agent that specializes in something, you can just move that into Squad and run that. It's one of the things that I do. But lots of things we can do in here. And if we look at these charters, I mean, this is more of a job description. I think one of the things that the team has done really well is defining those charters and giving a good way of defining this. And again, we're going to see this in a moment. You don't have to write it yourself, right? You can let the Squad engine help you build that. Again, using AI to build those. But again, we can see how they're well defined in here. But the other big part is the handoffs, right? So we can see this, right? A task comes in, right? And so our lead gets that, and then the lead hands it off to the developer. Hey, here, I need you to do this. I need you to write this piece of code, right? And then when the developer's done, they can hand it off to the tester and say, okay, I've got my code written. Now go test this, right? And then maybe they'll go back. Well, not maybe. Then generally we'll go back to the lead for feedback, right? Okay, here's what we did. Here's the test results, And again, this is parallel, right? This is happening parallel as when can be, and it's iterative. right? So this is continuing, you know, and agents are passing forth, and this is just showing a very simple. I mean, here I've only got 3 agents. The example I'm gonna run is a simple one again, so it runs faster. But we can have we can have more agents, right? I mean, I do caution you. I like to still stick to the whole the 2 pizza rule. When it comes to team size, right? How many I mean, I grant you, how many agents can eat 2 pizzas? Well, a whole lot because they don't eat. But I still, that whole adage of, have your team size fit within what you can feed with 2 pizzas. And again, just, the other nice parts we can watch everything. So let's see this all working. So I'm gonna go back in here. And I'm going to go into my, I didn't do the agents demo. I just realized that. I apologize. Or the instructions demo. I completely blew through those. Well, at the end, if we want, I can go back to those. But if I go to my squad team, pull up my cheat sheet here. So again, I'm gonna go to Copilot. Oh well, you would normally, if you have not installed it before, I'm going to do a npm install. That's not the right install. Second. I would do that command right there. I'm not going to run it because I already have it installed. But I can run this command. It's all running TypeScript and so forth. It's using npm for its distribution. So really easy. Because it's npm, you only install it for the whole machine. So it's not like you need to install it for every project. So that's nice with that. But one thing you would next do is a squad, right? So I'm initializing this repo I'm in, and I didn't. Yes, I want to make sure I moved to the right repo. So, and basically now, if we were to look, we can see there's this .squad folder along with the .copilot and GitHub folders that were normally used. So it's added a bunch of files, and I'll show those here in a minute while it's running some of this. We'll talk about the squad files. So now if I was to go in here and I'll do Copilot, I'm going to specify the agent. So I'm going to say use the squad agent. I could do that inside Copilot, but it's also really easy to do here. And again, I'm going to do my YOLO command. And so once I'm in here, I'm now going to I'm going to start a project. So start a project, I need to start a team, right? So I'm gonna give it a prompt like this. I'm starting a new project to build a task management app using C#, .NET 10, Blazor, and SQLite. I want a 3-agent team, lead developer, tester, use names from the Silicon Valley universe. I love using, if you don't know the Silicon Valley TV show, very funny TV show. If you're easily offended, don't watch it. But it's pretty real life. I love using it as my characters because honestly, the characters are very flawed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very interesting TV show. So it's kind of funny to see them doing good work over here. But so I give it this kind of command. I'm going to go ahead and do that and talk while it's doing some things. So a couple things with that prompt. The prompt is pretty much the way how it's documented in the documentation. I'm starting a new project. Here's what I'm doing. I actually don't even have to tell it a 3-agent team, and what agents I want. I could make it simpler and just say, here's what I'm creating. But again, I'm trying to speed this up a little bit because otherwise it will process longer to do that. Now I will say, as I'm building new squad teams, I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and I'll come back to this. I will actually define them a little bit more, right? I'll actually say, okay, here's exactly what I want. Mostly because I just find it actually speeds things up. So you'll notice it will even prompt me, and it says, okay, there were no team members. You told me to create this, so Richard's going to be my lead, Guilfold's going to be my developer, Dinesh will be my tester. And then notice we got Scribe, Ralph, and Ria. And I didn't ask for those. Those are automatic. So Scribe, its whole job is to record decisions and everything. One of the big benefits of Squad is as it's doing things, it's making decisions and it's recording that for its own history, right? And so that the team knows about decisions, later on. Much better than just a context window, because a context window, one, eventually will get too full and it needs to clear up. But two, even when it's in there, I mean, there's times that the agents will, or not just agents, but AI will lose that. Here, it's actually recording it better, so it's nice, and that's Scribe's whole job. Ralph, I don't use Ralph too much. Ralph is a Ralph loop. This is not just a squad concept. This is an AI concept. It is named after Ralph Wiggum, and basically the whole idea, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? It's just looking for changes, and then it's looking for those, but then it'll also look at like your backlog and say, okay, well, we're done with that. Now I'm gonna work on this one. We're done with that. We're gonna work on this one. I personally don't work that way. I do small bits and pieces and see results, validate it, and go forth, right? And I highly recommend you work it that way. And then RIA is actually, this is something new, and I haven't really fooled around to this much, but the RIA is responsible AI. And basically, this is, like I said, they just added this in. And if you know Brad Gaster, you understand, and he's very big about responsible AI. And so it's trying to help with that. So there we go. It's created my team, right? The team is hired. There we go. And you see, I get a suggestion of what I should do. And one of the nice things in here is I can give it examples like that, right? I can say Richard, so I can actually call out somebody here. I want you to do this, or I could say I can just make regular commands, and then the coordinator will depending on what I ask, I might just get an answer from Copilot, or if I ask something specifically, it will hit the right agent to get that question. Or I can say, hey, spawn the team to do this, right? I mean, so lots of things we can do in here. So let's start getting this team to do something, all right? So I wrote a PRD. I'll show that PRD in a moment. So PRD, product requirement description, or document, sorry. So basically, I'm just telling, hey, here's a PRD. Look at this PRD. Use that as your source of truth. And then basically, I'm telling it, I want to build a simple Blazor to-do app. It does create, read, update, delete. I tell it to keep the implementation simple, to keep it clean. I'm telling it to remove the default Blazor template leftovers, right? You create a Blazor app and you get the counter and the weather thing. I'm telling it, hey, get rid of that, all right? Now we'll see. It's funny. I've had it not remove those, even though I specifically told it to do that. And then I tell this, after the lead deposes the work, show me the work for approval, right? I highly advise you do that, right? Don't let it just start doing work. Start looking at what it's doing. And so while that's working, one, if we look at this PRD, just to give you an example of what I gave it, right? So, I'm calling this task manager, and again, PRDs don't have to be exactly this format. The point is that they're providing the requirements for what you're building. So you can see in here, I'm giving an overview. I'm telling the problem statement, hey, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I don't want you to do. And also, I think what I don't want you to do is almost more important than those primary goals, right? Because like in here, I'm trying to keep it simple, right? I'm talking about who is going to be a user. I'm giving it some functional requirements, all right? Giving it some user experience requirements, right? Technical requirements. Because again, I want it to be focused. I don't want to just generate whatever, honestly, most AIs, if you don't tell it, it'll probably build a React app, right? Which, again, nothing wrong with React, but like in this example, I wanted to build me a .NET app. And again, just, and finally the definition done, right? Hey, here's what I'm expecting you to do. So let's take a quick look. I know it's still working because you can't see it, but my icon's got a little scrolling bar. So it's still working on this. It'll take a moment for it to generate that plan. But if I was to go back to the folders, so I talked about, we have the squad folder, and I just want to show a couple things in here. So, we can see quite a few things are creating here. So one, I talked about the decisions. Now, right now, there won't be any decisions because it's still working. Well, it's got the initial architecture, right? So it's already starting to record some decisions. This memory, I'm still actually, memory just got added, and I'm still playing with that a little bit to understand it more. But again, that idea of providing it some more memory, so that a little more than just the decisions, but memory of what it's done. All right, let me go back to here because we want to keep this moving. So we can see it's come up with a plan. And again, like I say, every time I run this demo, I get something different. It went ahead and gave me ADRs. So architecture decision records. I'm a big fan of ADR, so great. All right. We can see it decided to do Blazor, flat files, single home razor. So great. Yeah, that all makes sense. We can see that, it's defining, it's going to attempt a clamp. We're going to see if it actually does it this time. The time before, it did not do it. It was kind of funny. And then we can see the work items that it's going to do. So now it's telling me, okay, do you want to begin this, or do I want it to, make any changes? Now, in most reality, you're probably going to make some changes, right? Let's do this or let's do that. But for this example, I want to actually do something a little bit different. And, I just wanted to get to do the work, right? So I'm going to say, plan approved, move forward with, or I'm going to actually say, spawn the team to build this all the way through the plan. Now, again, normally I would tell it, hey, okay, do work item 1, maybe work item 2, right? I might combine a couple things. But again, I'm doing a demo. I want it to go a little bit faster. So I'm going to tell it, hey, go ahead and do a bunch of things at once, right? And I'm just kind of waiting here a second to see when it starts spinning off users. Okay, and I'm also taking the time to actually look at the comments. And so I will address those here in a second. I will say one of the hard parts about when you're in Teams doesn't do a good job of showing comments while you're presenting. All right, it's still working. Let me go back to the files I was talking about. So we have those kind of things. But the other thing I want to show, so we see our agents, right? We see all these folders. So let's open it so I can, let me open this differently. If we were to look at these, I was in the right folder there, but. So, I see all my my charters, right? So we see all the different agents. So here you can kind of see what this is writing, right? This is defining the agent. It is called charters, and by default, they'll say, here's my identity, here's what Richard owns, right? So he's the lead architect, so or the lead of this whole project. How they work, boundaries they have. It'll have the model, right? And I do like this. This is one of the changes they did make is to prefer using auto, right? Because again, we talked about that earlier on. Talk about its collaboration. We talked about its voice, right? So what kind of voice does it use? And honestly, that's probably the biggest thing I change around is, making sure I get the voices I'm kind of looking for in here. All right, well, we can see this is starting to work. We're going to let this work for a little bit. There we go. Well, the one thing else I'll show, if we go to 10, so we'll see that I've got 2 agents working right now. So Scribe is logging some stuff, and then Guilfold's working. in a moment, if we go back, we'll see that Dinesh is also doing some stuff. So let me look at these comments here real quick and address some of these, because I did see some good things in here. So in particular, I saw this here. So Brian's asking about, can I talk about whether I think Quad uses more tokens than other ways of agentic coding, especially now that usage costs, and also how might this compare to using SpecKit? Okay, so let me go to the SpecKit first and then come back. So number one, I can use SpecKit. I have not, but you can use SpecKit alongside of Squad, because Squad is can use the benefits of SpecKit, right? And again, SpecKit, the whole idea of defining requirements and basically trying to do more of that requirements first development, which you saw me sort of doing already, because I was telling it, hey, here's a PRD, defining that work. So you can definitely tie those two together. And admittedly, I hope I said that correctly, because like I said, I know it's SpecKit. I don't use it very much, just because I was already doing some things, and it's not a dislike of SpecKit. It was, it didn't provide any extra things for me to use. But I really like this question about, is it using more tokens, right? And so forth, because that is a really important question. So number one, if we look, so far I've used 137 AI credits, right? Now exactly how many tokens I did, until I close this and get to that screen, I won't really know for sure. But we can kind of get an idea of what we've done. So is it using more tokens than not using Squad? No. As a matter of fact, Squad was written to optimize token usage, right? So it's funny because if you look when Squad came out in February, right? It's a it was to the point I was actually at an event in Montreal at the very end of February, and a friend of mine was asking me, "Hey, have you seen Squad?" And I felt so stupid because I hadn't seen it. It had been out for like a week and a half. I'm like, okay, well, I don't feel that stupid now. But even then, I mean, and if you look at, so Brady Gaster, the guy who originally started this project and still very heavily in it, he's a Microsoft employee, and Microsoft, especially back then, was all about how many tokens can you use. Right? They were definitely about token maxing, and Brady had this whole belief that we shouldn't be doing that, right? We should be, again, the whole reason why he put in a responsible AI agent in there, he wants it to be more responsible. He takes the whole energy stuff very seriously, right? So it's so are you going to use more than having just one agent doing stuff? Yes, because you've got more agents doing things, but only at that very moment in time. I think in the end, you're actually going to end up using less, because it is doing more coordination, and because I've got more specialization, and I'm saying, hey, spin off this work to this type of person, spin off that work to this type of agent, right? So there should be less rework, in that. And I think that's why you're going to see some benefits of that. Let's see what this has done so far. So it's still, okay. So Richard is, okay. So Dinesh is writing running the test now, and Richard's queued up to review. So they're almost done. But one other example. So I talked about building this architecture team and stuff. So we've done that, right? We've built a team to help us with our architecture, and on that team, we've highly specialized them. So we have an agent. The whole agent's responsibility is API and event contracts. And we do a lot of event-driven architecture. And so I have a whole agent. Its whole purpose is to look at those contracts. I have another agent. Its whole purpose is writing mermaid diagrams. All right. So you can do things like that. And because you're doing that, and because you've given them specific instructions, and you say, hey, use this instruction specifically, it really does kind of help it out in the end. So All right, so Rich is now doing the final review, so we should be pretty close to here. So I'm gonna go back to the slides real quick, and then we'll in a moment we should have that up and running. So I mean we haven't seen it yet. I'm gonna come back to that, but basically what we saw, we were seeing that, right? It was we saw the coordination, right? We saw that Guilfoyle, who was our developer, was writing code, and then spinning off to the scribe saying, "Hey, I've done these things. Record, these decisions we made." It then spawned it off to Dinesh to start writing, tests and running those tests. And then what it's doing right now is having Richard, the lead, do the code review. Right? I mean, now it's not going to do specifically. It's not going to do a PR or anything because I don't have it tied to a GitHub repo. But you could, right? It's actually was designed to do those kind of things. So let's look at a review. So I wrote 5 minutes. One of these days I'll change this because that wasn't 5 minutes. But we saw that, right? It broke down the requirements to figure out what it needed to do. The developer, wrote that code. The tester, did the validation, and then it goes back to the lead to say this is done, right? And hopefully in another minute we'll have that built here. But that was pretty cool what we saw there. And I see it's still working, so we'll come back to that. So when to use squad, when not to use squad. So this is another interesting part. One of the things that I've learned is when you start using squad, you love it, and all of a sudden you want to solve everything with it. I mean, number one, we're technologists, and that's normal for us to begin with. But squad is really addictive. That's one of the things if you start using this, you'll see that a lot. As I mentioned, I learned about this at an event. It was the final day of the event. This event is lots of social activities. And honestly, it was a Friday, and I've been there since Monday or Tuesday, and every night there was something, right? And I was like, okay, I've had enough. I went back to my, and I didn't have to be up early in the morning. I had like a 11 o'clock flight or something like that. It was a later flight, so I didn't have to be up first thing in the morning. So I went back to my room, and I was up till like 3 in the morning just playing with the squad and doing different things with it. But squad's not right all the time, right? And, I mean, the first two are the obvious ones. I mean, if you're just doing a quick fix or you're doing a single file edit, right? I mean, we saw. I mean, there it is done, but I built an app pretty quickly, right? And we'll see what the app had built, but it still took time, right? I mean, so if I was just doing simple things, it doesn't necessarily make sense. We start seeing it make sense, maybe a multi-file feature if there's a lot of changes within there. But again, when we're getting those large projects, cross-cutting concerns, team scale problems. But even with that being said, I was having a discussion the other day. I got a tech lead who is trying to write a process of, when they get the architecture, and what's the first steps to do? Basically, dissecting it, reading out the features, and then how they process through it to build, their implementation task and so forth. Because basically, we're sort of following safe, but we're not following safe. And safe being an agile, different way of doing agile. But the important part is, in the way how our developers work is, the tech lead gets the architecture, they distill that into the tasks that need to be done, and then it goes up to refinement. They refine it, and then it goes into a sprint. And and it's funny because he and I were talking. He was talking about these different agents he wanted to have, and I was like, but are they really doing anything different? Are really a different skill set, or is it really all a tech lead? And we came to the decision it really is all a tech lead, right? And so there are times where you don't necessarily need a different and kind of to this point, right? Make the tool solve the problem. All right, let me finish these slides and we'll look at this. and we'll look at the demo built. So Squad isn't faster than Copilot, right? But it's an orchestrated collaboration, right? It works as fast as Copilot does. It is faster in the sense than if I was switching agents, right? It's definitely faster than that, but it's not faster in itself. Each agent, has its bound context. So that's one of the nice parts with this, right? When I spin off that work, each agent is getting its own, context to work with. And then, the real quality comes from that coordination, right? That's where we're really starting to see some things. And yes, I haven't played a whole lot with the agents team in the Cloud Code. I need to. I just haven't had a chance. It's one of the things that's on my short list to do, but it is very similar. So sure enough, Squad came out when we were just starting to explore the whole multi-agent thing, and we were already seeing some things doing this. And it really kind of, it honestly sets the stage. So, like the reason why you see something very similar in Cloud Code is because, Squad was handling it so, so well. So, all right, let's see what we built. So we can see in here, it says the session is fully wrapped. Everything is doing this. So I'm gonna cheat here real quick, and I'm gonna say start up the app so I can test it and tell me the URL to go to. And I'm just cheating here a little bit real quick. Because again, we can see that I can still ask a regular Squad team. So there we go. It's going to start that up. And I always love to see what it built this time around. And I will say it said it started up, but I haven't seen it startup window come up. Okay, well, let's see. I don't see a startup window, but no, it did start up. Okay, so there we go. Whoops. So we can see we have a simple task editor. I can, finish the demo. All right, so we can add them. We can edit them now. All right, save it. I can mark it delete. All right, or I can mark it complete. All right, I can delete it. So pretty easy, right? And it did exactly what it did. It is really interesting. And again, like I say, you see different things every time. One time at one presentation, so this is the 6th or 7th time I've done this presentation. And one time I did the presentation, I got like this beautiful app, right? It didn't have the purple bar. It actually, it was using the whole screen. It looked really nice. It was really interesting because I did exact same prompts. All right. So, and sure enough, your next iteration, with this is you would say, oh, let's add some nice features in here. Well, I just noticed it added an about in here. I'm almost curious what it did there. That just goes to the, all right. So the point is, we saw that, and, not too bad for a couple minutes worth of work, right? So, sorry, I'm trying to get back to this. So, so with that, right, and I'll open up for questions, but when can you start? Monday. Well, you can start tomorrow, right? You don't have to wait till Monday. But think about your path, right? And again, hopefully you are using Copilot, or honestly, using Cloud Code or using Cursor or what have you. If you're going to use Squad, you need to be using Copilot. Hopefully, using things like the CLI, if that makes sense for you, but using agents, right? And then, the Squad team, right? Getting that multi-agent. And yes, there are, like I said, there are competitors to Squad. It's just, honestly, and I'm a bit of a Microsoft fanboy anyways, but I really do like Squad. Or not just Squad, I really do like GitHub Copilot. I admit I am liking Claude more and more every time I use it. But I will say this: I seem to time out, Claude a whole lot quicker than I time out Copilot. So, I don't know if it's just me, but and I definitely, in my request I do within there. So there are some resources. So there's the GitHub page, for the features. There's I've got in there the Awesome Copilot library, so github.com/github/awesome copilot. So lots of different agents and skills and instructions you can download. Skills.sh is another really good site for finding things. Honestly, you'll find a little more complex skills in there. And then the final, I just noticed that Squad is kind of cut down, but Radegeister is the guy who started this whole thing. So /Squad, right, for that. So that let's see here. I saw a couple of things. Also, if you use Claude Code and don't have Opus, uses that for orchestration, but you can overwrite your settings to point orchestrator. Okay. Yeah. So honestly, Frank's comment here is again another really good point. Talking about agent usage, whether whether you're using Copilot, whether you're using Claude, whether or GPT, right? They're tools. We don't need to, like I said, Fable just came out, and Fable I have not played with it at all yet, but Fable's, from what I've seen, is amazing. All right. But that's not sort of the tool we need to use all the time, right? And especially because it's really expensive, right? I mean, it's twice the price of everything else, or it's twice the price of Opus, right? Which is X times more expensive than the Sonnet and so forth. And the point I'm trying to make it, and again, whether regardless of which one you're using, you really should look to use the right model for doing that. So again, so here the point is it's you can overwrite the settings, so to point it to something other than Opus and so forth. And I would do that. Your coordinator does not need Opus, right? Or definitely doesn't need Fable, all right? Honestly, a lot of the things that we do with the coordinator, you can do stuff with Haiku if we're looking at Claude. A prime example is if I'm doing, just more automation work, hey, go through here and find all the references of this and make this change or what have you. I'll switch it down to like a GTP Mini 5, right? Because that's not computational, right? And why am I going to waste AI credit, especially now I'm paying for all the credits I use? Why am I going to waste that, to do those kind of things? Especially because in the old model, those cost 0 requests, so it was even worth it more then. But still, definitely with that. Can I use Squad with other AI tools? So no, Squad is definitely meant for GitHub Copilot. And it's using the Copilot SDK. So Squad only works with the Copilot harness. Now again, I can't use it with Claude Code, but I can use it with the Claude models or with the GPT models, and so forth. So there is a limitation, but well, number one, you got to think it's someone who, especially now, Dev and Microsoft is now all part of. It's all merged all together, right? So they definitely want to promote GitHub anyways. But they had to make a choice, and because they are directly using the SDK to do the coordination work. So any other questions? Well, awesome. And again, I mean, if someone comes up with something, definitely feel free. So I really appreciate you all having me. I just realized I don't have my contact information here, but the easiest way to get hold of me is chadgreen@chadgreen.com. definitely if you got questions about squad or or I remember as I was mentioning when we were just getting started, I've been doing a lot of work over the last couple months of how to improve our processes. So I've mentioned several times the architecture one, but also I've been working on even like how do I get my business analysts to be able to use AI in general, but even Squad to help with their work, right? And we're starting to see success there. So and I obviously like to talk about things, right? So it's yeah. So I see comments coming, so I'm just sitting here.
Hey, while people are typing those comments, we'd like to remind you there's a link in the chat, tinyurl.com/SLC prize. If you go provide some feedback for Chad there, then you get entered to win a prize. We have 4 prizes, 2 ebooks from O'Reilly, and 2 like single product JetBrains licenses.
Cool. I like that. It's we don't do that at Louisville. Maybe you do. Okay, hold on. Let's see here. There's that. If you use Cloud Code, it hasn't. Oh no, I already read that. Okay. So have you used Squad with other humans on your team? Is it better to be one human? Okay. So basically, the question is doing with multiple humans and so forth. Okay, and the merge conflict. So I have not seen too many issues with the merge conflicts. But honestly, most of our work so far has been one person at a time. So honestly, I need to think some more about that. I need to do some more testing with that. It just happens to be most of our stuff has been one person working at a time, and we're mostly because we're a smaller development team or development group. We do have multiple dev teams and so forth, but our total software development department is like 35 people. So it's not that big. I mean, there's only 2 architects at the moment. But I will say, that does bring up a good point. Squad is built to work with multiple humans. So one of the things I can actually do in there is I can actually tell it, so it automatically assumes you are, and it does look up, it looks up your Git profile name, and we use that. But I could say, hey, I want to, I've also got, I've got Joe is my, my requirements analyst, right? Add him as a human, user in there. And, one of the, and I can also tell it, hey, when we get questions about the requirements, we need to spin it off to Joe, right? Because he's the right person to ask. Now, I've done that. What I haven't done, and mostly because our company's tied some things down too much, you can also even have it send like Teams messages. So it could actually send a message to Joe and say, hey, I've got this question, right? And Joe would know to answer that. How do you restart Squad on machine reboots? Must you restart the... So, yeah. All right. So as far as restarting Squad and the sessions and so forth. So admittedly, I have a tendency, I just keep on using the same session throughout my whole thing, right? And so I do the whole rename so that I know what the name of that session was, and I just name the projects. Yeah. So, and then within Copilot, as of right now, and I don't know if this has changed or not, but those are local in your machine, so it's a little bit harder to share. But when my machine reboots or when I switch, I'm not working in that on that project with that squad team. I'm working with this squad team and so forth. I do have to restart. If I wanted to have the context of the session we were having, I would need to restart the session. Now, again, the thing to remember is that it is recording decisions, right? So you don't necessarily have to do that. And again, one of the benefits is another person can, pull down the repo, and they will get those. With that being said, there's a really big caveat with that. I want to point out so Scribe does not fire off all the time, which is a good thing. But it's also what I found is sometimes you think you're done and Scribe hasn't recorded everything, right? It's got it in a temporary storage area, but not in the correct storage area that where it's actually written it out. So one of the things I will do, like before I'm ready to do I've been working on a whole bunch of stuff. I'm now ready to do a PR. I will ask it, hey, has Scribe scribed everything that it needed to scribe, right? And I'm not gonna say more often than not, but it's not that unusual where it says, no, Squad has some things in its inbox it needs to write out. And so I'll do that. So really important thing there. Okay, how many features, experiments, or tasks do you typically work? Okay, how many experiments or tasks do you typically work on? Sometimes when I try to do too many things at the same time, I forget the context. Okay, so generally, for my work, I'm generally working on a feature, and a feature will have one or more product backlog items, and then potentially have, each product backlog item will have one or more tasks associated with it. What we haven't done yet right now, what we do is, so like when we're going to start so I'll talk about the architecture process in particular. When we're going to start architecting a feature, the first thing we do is we actually copy down that feature and all the details in it, the description, the acceptance criteria, and then we do the same thing with the product backlog items. And we actually put that in files into the repo. And we do that so it's all local. And then I have told the squad team, hey, here's where those backlog items are. Now I mentioned, I was working on a skill to automatically go read that. I'm still going to have it actually save the file and then do routine updates on that. And again, most of that is one to reduce the number of AI credits, because again, I don't have to have it spin off a tool to go read the Azure DevOps in this case, to go get it, because it's cheaper for it to read it local. But then you see, sometimes too many at the same time. And that's one of my big points of why I like using it for like architecture, because when we're working on architecture, that's one of our biggest problems is that so you look at the role of an architect. An architect might be working on one feature, but has to think about everything that goes into that feature and all the impacts, all that kind of stuff. So context is hard, right? And I actually talk a lot about this. I did this presentation for the first time last Friday, and on using AI to do architecture. And one of my big points I'm talking about is, it's hard for us to keep all that context, and AI can do that better. Now AI will lose that also, so you got to be responsible for that too. And again, that's where I think a tool like Squad, where it's recording those decisions, it's recording that memory, which again, Copilot does still, or not Copilot, Claude also has memories and stuff. So I mean, there's, again, Squad is not unique in that, but it's one of the tools that provides that.